Can you believe it? We're almost done. Chapter 7, Part 2, Living in the World We've Made. So we're going to wrap up pretty much the entire course in this last lecture. And what this will do is bring in a lot of concepts that you have been hearing throughout the entire semester. So as far as the objectives, we're going to complete those today, but I really wanted to point out, if you can tell in this subtle font, that you must complete exam 4 before Friday at 11:59 p.m. because the next morning is graduation. Okay, so you need to have this done, and I'm going to be sending out a lot of reminders. Okay, all righty. Uh, so just to, oh, and the terms have been updated. As always, I usually have to tweak a few things when I finish the last lecture of a particular chapter. So here we are. The updated stuff is in purple, and I took out a couple things. So, okay, so 7.6, the built environment in more developed countries. Electrical transmission lines. Now, this has been controversial for quite a long time. Living next to big, high power electrical lines, is this a problem? And you might have heard some rumors that it causes cancer. And to be honest, some of these things are very intimidating. They're quite massive, and if you live next to these, makes you a little nervous. If your children go to school next to one of these, uh, again, makes you pretty nervous. So what do we know about electrical transmission lines? Well, first of all, we do know that they emit extremely low frequency radiation, ELF. So if you go back down here, and if you can remember our lecture about the electromagnetic spectrum, remember that you have low frequency wavelengths, and that includes things like, well, what comes off of your cell phone and what comes off of a radio, that sort of thing, and even microwaves. So yes, we of course you know the high frequency stuff. We know that this can cause damage to DNA, right? And that causes cancer. That beats up genes in the DNA, which is not good and can cause ionization. So we don't like that. But what about the extremely low frequency radiation coming off of these power lines? Well, the U.S. National Center, or excuse me, the U.S. National Cancer Institute, IARC, and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, and they classify the extremely low frequency radiation in the electromagnetic field as possibly carcinogenic to humans, and they do classify it as a group 2B carcinogen. Now, most of the studies in the past have looked at risks of children developing leukemia, and that seems plausible. Their epidemiological studies have found that there is some kind of correlation. And other studies have looked at gliomas that appear in populations that are close to these electrical transmission lines. And this can occur in the brain or spinal cord, or basically a brain or spinal cord tumor. Here's an illustration of a glioma. Now, that is more controversial than the childhood leukemia. And here's the big force behind the controversy is that we still haven't figured out the biological mechanism behind this that would cause the low frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum to cause, well, we can't figure out a mechanism as to how that would cause cancer. High frequency, sure, yes, like it says, like we said before, causes ionization. That can beat up DNA. DNA getting messed up, okay, that can mess with how cells replicate. You know, the remember the on switch, the off switch, the accelerator and the brake pedals of a cell. And yeah, you could get tumors. That seems to make sense. But the extremely low frequency radiation, still haven't figured that one out. But remember, epidemiology looks at risks and rates, but it really doesn't address the biological mechanism. Okay, it really doesn't do that. So that helps, but we haven't figured that out yet. So. Okay, let's look at suburban sprawl. Before that, just a little comment here. Now, in 2010, it was estimated that about half of the global population lives in an area like this, an urban setting. All right. Now, in an urban setting, well, people live a little differently than what we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So everything is highly concentrated. If you have to go to the doctor, you have to go to the school, have to go find some groceries. Probably there's a nice mass transit system that gets you from point A to point B. Mostly everything is fairly convenient, fairly convenient. But again, this tends to look, you know, a little daunting, and some people don't want to live in an urban setting for many reasons. From what I have heard, most people want to be homeowners for their pets, for their dogs, and they want yards for their pets. But also, if you're raising children, you might be worried about the outdoor pollution. Okay. And perhaps you think, well, a suburb would be a better place to raise my family. Okay, well, unfortunately, that produces suburbs that look like this. We call this the suburban sprawl. So you have large tracts of land, and they're for one use only, housing. And that's pretty much what everything's zoned for. It segregates these areas from every place else, from other tracts of land, usually by some open space or a barrier, a river, lake, what have you. Sometimes large industrial facilities. It depends. But here's the challenge. So if you live here, where do you go for, for your school, take your kids to school, to find a grocery store, to go to the doctors, to go to work? Okay, or to find recreation. Where do you go? Well, basically, you probably have to go pretty far, and that's the problem. Okay, you need a car. Well, that's going to cause some problems, isn't it? Yes, indeed. So you're going to need extensive road systems to get you in and out, and that's going to mean heavy traffic in that little environment that you thought was going to be nice and safe for your family. But okay, this can lead to air and noise pollution. Ambulance access is a little tricky. How are you going to get somebody to the hospital very quickly if you've got roads like this and you're somewhere deep inside a suburban little area like that? Oops, sorry. And because you're living in the suburb, you have single family homes. All right. So that's going to consume an awful lot of energy. You're going to need a car. That's going to consume a lot of energy. So high per capita energy use in the suburbs. Okay. The other problem is high traffic fatalities. You tend to get sometimes traffic at high speeds outside residential areas, lots of bad accidents. Walking may become inconvenient. Truly, where you need to go, it might be quite a far distance, and there may not be really good places to walk. So it might be hazardous, and people might just say, I'm going to go take the car. And well, when you don't walk, that can lead to obesity. If you go to a lot of big cities, people walk everywhere. They yeah, that's just the nature of it. All that walking is good for you, but if you have a car that is only a few steps from your doorway, not a lot of walking there. So again, urban settings can also lead to obesity, but generally it's the poverty part. So you can live in the big city and be quite obese, but if if you don't have money for good food, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, you don't have the ability to be transported from A to B, well, that definitely can lead to obesity. I just wanted to show you this old picture of Omaha, Nebraska. If you live here, you may or may not be aware that we had streetcars, and they would carry people from the downtown area to the developing suburbs, especially Benson. Benson was quite the housing project, okay? And yeah, so mass transit was available. So if you lived in the city, sorry, if you lived in these new little suburbs, you could easily get transported into the city to your job. So that was quite nice. Generally, also these little suburbs were little communities unto themselves, and there was probably a grocery store and a school close by. But if not, again, you could jump on the streetcar. There was also another one that was going through Bellevue, and several others. And right now, developers are looking at putting streetcars back in. But if you're asking, well, why don't we still have streetcars? Omaha, Nebraska, even though the buses are really nice and they try the best they can, but sometimes there's so much congestion, there's a lot of pollution, and what went on? Well, there was a big move towards big buses, and you could probably look up historically how the buses and the big vehicles, the guzzling vehicles, how they were chosen over mass transit in several large cities. I won't go there. Okay. This was not in the book, but we need to talk about urban food deserts. Okay. So this is an urban food desert. Now, if you're thinking, well, it looks like plenty of food to me, look closer. This is, for some people, the only sources they have for food within within a half a mile. So, do you see anything healthy? Everything's processed, isn't it? It's not good. This is a bad food desert. So, what is a food desert again? It's any residential area where the distance to a supermarket is more than a half a mile or 0.5 miles away. Here's an example. There are some cities who are quite notorious about having lots of food deserts. Detroit and Baltimore, and many, many, many others. But this just shows these areas, and again, who lives in these? Probably people who don't have a lot of resources. The median household income in that area is at or 185% below the federal poverty level. So, how are these people going to get out and get good food and medical attention, lots of other things? But how are they going to get to good food? Well, and unfortunately, 30% of the households here are without cars or vehicles. Some of them, in order to get to a grocery store that really has groceries, the produce and the meat counter, all those unprocessed food resources, sometimes they have to take two buses to get there, and then they have to haul it all home. For a lot of people, maybe that is impossible, medically impossible for them to do. So, based on a USDA 2006 to 2010 report, about 10% of the US population lived in a low income food desert. So, are these people going to be able to get to a grocery store like this? Well, about 2% of the population lived more than a mile from the nearest grocery store without any vehicle. So some of them, again, sometimes they have to take two buses and they have to haul this stuff. So not good. Let's go from suburban sprawl. And like I said, I added the food desert in there because I thought it was very relevant to community health. Let's talk about construction practices. Okay. So, the built environment in more developed countries. And for a lot of you, this is going to be part of your environment. Construction practices are very important because indoor settings are very enclosed spaces, and Americans spend an awful lot of time there. And on average, 87% of their time is spent indoors, 67% of their time is in the homes. So pretty much the rest of it, well, as you can imagine, is at work. But again, more people are spending time indoors. How about the children? Well, they spend a lot of their time indoors as well, either at school or at home. Basically, it boils down to this. There's not a lot of this going on. Okay. So we're returning to radon gas in buildings. because this is definitely a problem in many households, especially if you live in this particular area, right? In Nebraska, in Omaha, big time. Central Nebraska is a little easier, a little less on the radon gas, but there's really a lot of radon gas naturally in this area. And how does it get into the house? Well, it is just natural. It seeps into the house through cracks in the basement. Sometimes it gets up through groundwater, and especially if you have a well of some sort, you're really probably going to have a lot of radon coming into the house, even through the faucets. And before World War II, there really wasn't a lot of very good construction. So there were a lot of holes throughout the house, but that did allow some of the radon to slip out and fresh air get in. But after World War II, it was all about efficiency and tight construction. So for people, especially if you have any cracks in the basement or any other avenues for radon gas to get into your house, it gets in and it doesn't leave. And you turn on the tap and it is volatile. It's released into the air and can accumulate into the indoor air quality. So it begins a series of rapid breakdowns, and if you remember, it is an alpha emitter, and even though it's very easily blocked, okay, let me show you a picture. Hold on. Ah, ah, ah. Even though alpha particles are easily blocked, right? If you inhale it or ingest it, it can cause lung cancer, and there's a very high risk of that. So, if you're in your house and you're just breathing, there you go. So, radon gas, big risk. Now, the positive part about this is that there's a lot of uh, companies out there that do radon remediation. So they have these pumps that will pump the air out of the house, and there are detectors, and it's very common here in the Midwest. Before you sell a house, usually there's an inspector that will come in and he will use a meter to detect your radon levels. Unfortunately, with my house, I was riding the border. So one of the things I do, and I'm just going to pass this along, no matter what time of year it is, when I come home, I open up the back door. And it's true, I'm going to lose some heat in the winter and some coolness in the summer, but an enclosed space is not good. And I always try to air out the house as often as possible, no matter how inclement it is. And I highly recommend that unless you already have the system in place to pump out the radon gas. Okay? And a lot of you probably do have this problem. What else? Okay, well, there's other unhealthy construction problems. For example, the asbestos. Yeah, we're back to that. The reason I'm back to that is because you all live in an industrialized country. You've all been exposed, and nearly everyone has asbestos fibers in the lungs. Does that mean you're going to get cancer? Well, there's some risk of lung cancer, absolutely. Especially if you live in an older house, or you work in an older building, or you visit people in an older building. A lot of the pipes are still wrapped up in asbestos because, again, it's a great insulator. A lot of it is blown up into the attics. How are you going to get all of that out of there? Okay, because it's there. Um, Getting rid of and if you remember this, of course, the asbestos fibers, they wedge into the smaller parts of the alveoli. You get an inflammatory response, and yes, this is bad. Okay, if it goes on, it can even cause mesothelioma, right? All right, something else that can be in construction that can cause you to become sick, this would be formaldehyde. Remember, the aldehyde's not a good substance. Before the 1970s, there was an awful lot of insulation made of urea formaldehyde, but that was discontinued in the 1970s. However, there are many other formaldehyde-containing products out there. So, for example, pressed wood. Do you have any of that in your house? The answer is yes, you do. Wrinkle-free clothing, which I love, but I sure don't like formaldehyde. Carpeting, a lot of carpeting was created with formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a way to preserve, and it's used in an awful lot of industrial products. It just is. Now, another problem that can occur is if you burn wood, for example. This can become a gas in the air, and the formaldehyde can be an irritant. It can cause asthma, trigger asthma attacks, and yes, formaldehyde is a carcinogen. So when you burn wood, especially if you don't know where that wood came from, that can be a hazard. Enclosed stoves are much safer, but the kind that we really like, especially around Christmas time, yeah, a lot of times they can release an awful lot of formaldehyde and other particulate matter that you just don't want in the air. Okay, sometimes there are unhealthy construction materials that produce sick buildings. You probably have experienced this at one time or another. Maybe you're experiencing it now. Maybe you never really thought about it. You went into the building and you just didn't feel good at all, and you kind of got headachy or just started to cough. But then when you left the building, you felt much better. And maybe you're thinking right now, oh my goodness, I think I know what she's talking about. Yes. So understand that sometimes indoor air quality can be much worse than anything you would find even in a major city. And you don't have to be in a big city building in order to start to feel sick, to experience a sick building. This can even be your own home. It can be the school. It can be a government building. It can be lots of things. So, sick building syndrome, what is this? Now, this is just what we use to describe nonspecific symptoms experienced by occupants of a building. So, again, there's different people experience different things when they're in the building, and then they leave, they feel better. Well, that gives a sick building designation. That building is causing the occupants to experience all these symptoms. Now, we don't at this point, these are very general terms. We're not really designating the exact cause or even symptom, but in time, usually these buildings get investigated. So, we look for building related illnesses. And usually these can be linked to many different things. Remember when we were talking about volatile organic compounds? Well, those could be in your paints, your wood preservatives, aerosol sprays, cleaners, air fresheners. Don't get air fresheners. Okay. If you're at home or in school, hobby supplies, dry cleaned materials, pesticides, building materials of all kinds, furnishing, office equipment, sometimes for example, the ink and other materials that run the office equipment. Okay, all of those can contain volatile organic compounds. So they float in the air, right? Also, let's talk about molds and just poor air quality in general. You just don't get enough oxygen. Okay. Noise, radon, asbestos, and other things that can't be listed here because it's just too numerous. This is from USA Today in their money part of their online page. And this just showed how some employees were experiencing mold problems. And I'll just read this. After moving into a new office building in New Orleans, Sherry Waters and her workers began complaining of odd ailments. Rashes, runny noses, breathing problems so severe that some employees carted oxygen to meetings. Can you imagine? Waters never thought leaking water from roofs, pipes, and other sources what was the cause basically of her headaches and other complaints. And legal team got involved and they found that it contained toxic mold. And so basically black mold. And this is just one thing. Sometimes you really can't get the problem identified. There have been, and I kid you not, brand new buildings that have been demolished. Okay, they just built it. People were just starting to put the furniture in the offices, and people were getting so sick that they had to demolish and condemn the building. And that happens. Sometimes you think, why, I know certain buildings, maybe they should be demolished, and they haven't. So, um, there you go. Oh, I wanted to mention one more thing, follow up on the radon story. Uh, and again, a sick building can be at home. It doesn't have to be where you work or your school. Uh, People really weren't very familiar with radon gas and the radioactivity that was radon gas and the problems that it caused. What really spurred this into the well, basically into our mindset was around the 1980s. There was a gentleman from eastern Pennsylvania, and he was a nuclear power plant worker, and he went to work one day and he set off the radiation detectors. So, of course, they were on this, trying to figure out what's going on in the nuclear power plant that's causing this poor guy to have such a high level of radiation. Turns out he got it from home. So, some people, again, a lot of these chemicals are completely invisible. You can't tell they're there, but then all of a sudden, and this gentleman wasn't even aware of the problem. He probably didn't have any symptoms yet. But radioactivity, again, can lead to cancer, especially the alpha emitters, if you're inhaling them. So just something to think about. Lifestyles, things we do, things we use. Tobacco smoke. Tobacco smoke. I love these ad campaigns that Big Tobacco used to put out. It just cracks me up. So here's a gentleman, and clearly, if he smokes Lucky Strikes, he won't be fat and unhealthy. He will be a good tennis player and maybe an Olympic athlete. Oh boy. Now, did they just target the men? Of course not. Okay, ladies, this is the way to stay slender. Smoke those cigarettes. Well, it is a bit of a stimulant, right? Um, and in case you started to feel guilty and thought, maybe I need to stop, well, this is telling you that psychologists, are telling you that every time you deny yourself a cigarette, when you want one, you just jolt your nerves. So really, you shouldn't deprive yourself because it's just going to make the situation worse. And historically, even in my day, smoking really was the cool thing. You had a motorcycle, you had a cigarette, and you reeked of cigarette smoke. Well, okay, that wasn't cool, but the rest of it was considered cool. Most people smoked. I figured I had enough habits, so I really wasn't all that into smoking at all. But in the military, smoking was very much encouraged. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to come up quite yet. But our soldiers were given a rations packet that always contained, well, candy and cigarettes and something to light the cigarettes with. But why do this? Well, because it was a way to keep soldiers alert. It's a stimulant. Again, it's something to do and might even calm nerves in a manner, especially when you're waiting. And sometimes there might be tense moments that lighting up a cigarette perhaps would be calming. But as a society, we're paying for all of this because now these poor veterans are in the VA hospitals and they have all kinds of cardiovascular diseases and cancers. So, all because cigarettes were pushed on them. And a lot of you will be taking care of people of my generation and before that who smoked continuously, many packs a day. About half of my siblings smoked. My dad smoked pipe. So unfortunately, he had a short lifespan, and my siblings, most of them are still around, but yeah, it's bad. In 1950, finally, scientists were able to link smoking to lung cancer. There was a British medical journal release that was sent out, and it was very clear, and that on top of other like massive amounts of scientific evidence said smoking is bad for you. Big Tobacco was very interesting and responded in an amazing manner. So I love this. It says that about 21,000 physicians say that Luckies are less irritated because they're toasted. Oh, yay. So it's going to protect your throat from irritation and coughing. Isn't that nice? Okay. So tobacco companies vehemently denied it, even though, as it turns out, they knew all about it. And evidence turned up that there were memos sent out. And because of that, different states have won certain lawsuits so that the tobacco industry will reimburse them for all of the medical costs that they have been stuck with all of these individuals who were smoking. Okay. So U.S. smokers over the age of 18 in about 1965, about 65% were men, 34% women. Um, Again, like I said, there was a big settlement agreement between the states and the tobacco companies. So they did pay out, but tell that to the families who lost their loved ones to lung cancer or to the people who are fighting lung cancer now. Even in 2010, about a fifth of U.S. adults are smokers, or were smokers. It's 2017. Cigarette smoke, just so you know, contains about 100 chemicals. 60 are carcinogenic. So if you wanted to do something worse for your health, okay, if you wanted to do it on a regular basis that wouldn't kill you immediately, cigarette smokes are probably ideal for you. By the way, one of the chemicals is actually a radioactive alpha emitter. Remember, if you inhale it, lung cancer. Polonium is the name of that particular chemical. And there are probably others depending on where the tobacco leaf is grown and how it is handled. So, lots of evidence on health hazards of smoking: emphysema, heart disease, heart attack, stroke, cancer, not just in the lungs, but the mouth, pharynx, larynx, lung, bladder, esophagus, stomach, kidney, pancreas, cervix, probably female breast cancer, and primary liver cancer. Before we go on any further about that, understand that not only are those chemicals carcinogenic, a lot of them just beating the snot out of your cell's DNA so that they can't control their growth. All right. Understand that the cells that you have, your immune cells, that are your good soldier cells, those are the ones that are supposed to go in and find cancerous cells and destroy them. Well, they're so busy trying to clean up the tar and all the other garbage from the particulate matter in the lungs, they don't have time to go out and find the cancerous cells. So, really, the most perfect weapon against your body is a cigarette. And it's the truth. I mean, I unfortunately have my own addictions, and I understand addictions, and there's very few things on this planet more addictive than cigarette smoke. Believe me, I understand, but you just need to have the information. A lot of you are going to have patience, and you're going to need to communicate to them why this is so very serious. It is also, interestingly enough, linked to hearing loss. And if you smoke during pregnancy, it does increase the risk of stillbirth, low birth weight, and sudden infant death syndrome. Okay, let's talk about environmental tobacco smoke, secondhand smoke. So, in adults, we know that it's linked to heart disease, heart attack, lung cancer, hearing loss. Back again with kids, sudden infant death syndrome. Well, they're not the ones doing the cigarette smoking in the household, as well as asthma and again, hearing loss. Smoking is on the rise in less developed countries. More than 8 million people projected to die from smoking related causes in 2030. Just when you thought, and everyone thought that Philip Morris and the tobacco industries, they were, they were hurting and they were shutting down because, well, smoking in the United States has decreased, but in developing countries, not so much. I know in Australia, the fields that used to grow tobacco leaves turned to growing certain kinds of fruit. And I thought, isn't that a nice trend? Well, unfortunately, if you push cigarette smoke to people in impoverished areas, that sometimes they might see the label but not really see the label, and then they are now at risk. If you're wondering about the picture on the right side, this is another one of those old lady stories. But I can remember the first time I got onto a plane was going to Denver, Colorado, and I was not a smoker, but my seat was right next to the smoking section. So, and I'm at the time I had no allergies or any problems, respiratory problems at all. And I can remember being just miserable during that flight. So of course now that is banned. Uh, so here's something that was on the internet some years back. This is Aldi Rizal, and I don't, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name properly, but this was all over the internet because this is a little boy, 2 years old, from Indonesia, and his mom would say, yes, if he didn't get his smokes, he would have a hissy fit, and it had to have his smokes. And of course, people were appalled by this. I just wanted to follow up on this just a little bit. He did. There are many campaigns to help this young man, and unfortunately, though, he did replace one addiction with another, and he became obese. But I'm not going to end on a sad note here because he kept at it and he lost the weight. So he did overcome, yay! But a lot of people, a lot of community health people had to get involved. Probably there was a big political uproar too, because, that politically that would be pretty ugly. But people got involved and they were able to help this young man turn his life around. I hope he can kind of keep that up. Okay. All right. So let's look at products used in the home. And okay, are you at risk of being exposed to something? Well, you probably know the answer to that is yeah, huh? Okay, paint. We've talked about lead before, and there's no threshold for lead paint. It's just not, or for lead exposure. We can't have it. Years ago, it was a major pigment in paint, especially for white lead. It was added to paint, gave durability, and gave brightness. So this is Dutch boy paint, and okay, just led the party. Uh-huh. By 1915, it was already known to be a neurotoxicant, but it was still used. By 1931, 11 European countries had banned white lead indoor paint. It took until about 1978 until the U.S. banned white lead paint in interior and exterior paints. Okay, so what building or house do you live in? When was it built? Well, if your home is built after 1978, you shouldn't have any lead-based paint in the house. Between 1960 and 1977, about 24% of older homes still contain it. If it was built between 1940 and 1959, about 69%. Before 1940, like my aunt's house, which was built and repainted a lot in the 1920s, well, 87%. We're still looking to see how that's going to turn out. We haven't had anybody test it. Ah. We used to think that children's exposure to lead was primarily through eating paint chips and things like that. Not only indoor and outdoor paint, but furniture and toys. And they can and they do, but we find that the major exposure is actually house dust. As the paint breaks down, it gets it becomes particulate matter, becomes part of house dust. The children inhale it, and also out in the backyard. So there's a lot of lead in the soil from all of the lead that's been used over time, and little kids put everything in their mouths. And there you go. So we think that's how they get the high lead levels. So again, homes with significant hazard. Well, in 1990, it was estimated there was about 64 million U.S. housing units that still had lead contamination. Um, Between 1998 and 2000, it was estimated about 38 million U.S. household housing units still had lead paint or lead contamination. Um, Again, remediation, getting rid of this safely is very difficult, very expensive. This is just showing what has to happen to the outside of a house. This isn't even showing you the inside of the house. But there is progress, and it is reducing the blood levels in U.S. children. And there's a graph from the author that I'll show you in just a little bit. But again, if you live in impoverished areas, and you're going to be exposed to lead paint. So there's racial and ethnic disparities still big time, as you can imagine. So here is a worker, and again, they have to be very careful about removing all that lead paint and getting it out of the air. This is showing the decline in blood levels in micrograms per deciliter in children ages 1 through 5. So we are seeing a considerable decrease. Yay! Okay, this is from the EPA. But it's still, again, for those children who live in areas where, they can't afford the remediation and they can't afford to move. All right, that's still way too high. Let's talk about personal hair care products. This cracked me up. Uh, these are deliberately applied to the body and used constantly, so habitual use. There's an awful lot of chemicals out there, and exposure is very hard to document for reasons that I'll talk about in just a little bit. But there's always, a changing list of products that people use over time, over long periods of time. So are you still using the same deodorant, the same toothpaste, hairspray, what have you? I know for my gentlemen out there, they're thinking, well, I don't have to worry about that too much, probably. But again, and not only do you as a consumer use different products over long periods of time, products themselves change their content and they change, the different kinds of ingredients that can be in there. And there's so many different products out there and so many ingredients. Now, the thing is if you are a manufacturer of these personal care products, you don't have to list every ingredient. For example, you do not have to include the inert ingredients. What's the inert ingredient? Those would be any ingredients that really aren't the ones that have the biggest effect. So you're not buying it for that particular chemical. If you're wondering what, well, let's say you're trying to, you want a cream or a lotion, so you want to change the texture, or you need something in the spray bottle so that things don't clump up or so that it aerosolizes better. Okay, those would be inert. You're not buying those chemicals. You're buying the skincare product, the hairspray, what have you, the deodorant. So what can be in these products? Well, phthalates, remember? All the endocrine disruptors and so forth and so on. Nail products are particularly really bad. Acetone is a well-known skin irritant, but toluene, which is in a lot of nail polishes, that sort of thing, is linked to kidney and liver damage. Okay, hormones. People will buy personal care products with hormones listed on purpose, okay? On purpose as a selling point. Now, if you're thinking, so, all right, we need a little time to lecture about that one coming up. The toxicity of many ingredients aren't even well known. Only recent attention to phthalates as endocrine disruptors have come up. I mean, how long did it take before we got rid of a lot of like the biphenyls, right? Okay, but and keep in mind that these products are so heavily marketed. So women buy a lot of this stuff, especially. And guys, they have their own line of hair personal products too, not just hair care, but many others as well. Just to stop for a moment and give you a little historical perspective, lead used to be a very important personal care product. So if you wanted your face to look this white, and you wanted to use a special kind of makeup to give you a very vibrant, either white color, or you could mix it with a pigment to give you a little bit of a rouge. It would just, it would pop. So why not? So this is a recipe on how to make a lead-based makeup. Okay, so steep the lead in a pot of vinegar, so that's an acid, and rest it in a bed of manure for at least 3 weeks. Horse manure, I guess, is what was used most commonly in the UK. That's where I got this. When the lead softens, pound it into a powder, and then you just mix it with water and let it dry. And you could add perfumes or any kind of dye or any tint to it, and there you go, voila! And this is what it looked like in little pellet form. So, hey, well, at least we moved on from that. What about housekeeping products as well as pesticides? Well, there's a lot of products out there, and you want to feel clean, and you want it antibacterial, and you want it to smell good. So, something springtime fresh. That's what they like to say, don't they? But unfortunately, a lot of those types of chemicals are especially respiratory irritants. So sometimes you need soap and water, and I try to stay clear of anything with a fragrance. I'm just saying, yes, it's kind of nice to have that fragrance in there, but if you want fragrance, why not go out and get some lavender oil or something like that? Yeah, so cleaning products, laundry products loaded with different kinds of chemicals, air fresheners, toilet bowl cleaners. All of these can contain a lot of very, well, products that are untested, products that are potentially unhealthy. We already talked about antibacterial soaps. Try finding something that doesn't have antibacterial on there. We finally got the triclosan off the market, right? For hand soaps, but not for everything. And not only is this an endocrine disruptor, but any antibacterial stuff in these solutions or in these home care products uh, potentially will add to some kind of resistance in the bacterial community. This is just that natural selection thing that we talked about before. We need to keep products like the real antimicrobial products like triclosan and chlorhexidine. We need to save those for surgical scrubs and things to prep our patients with. What we need at home, soap and water. Okay, things that aren't sexy, just regular cleaners, things maybe your grandma used. Although sometimes grandma would have some pretty toxic chemicals too. But you don't need a blowtorch. You just need something to clean with. Okay, also we could look at pesticides used in the home. Of course, you spray that stuff. It targets pests. Pests are animals. You are animals. And okay, some of those things are a little scary. And they are a special risk to children and, of course, pregnant women. Sometimes there are household pesticides that get out there that are illegal. This was in your book, and this is Chinese chalk. So I thought, oh, that's very interesting. So again, this is illegal. It looks like the regular kind of chalk that a child might use to play with, maybe draw on a sidewalk. And I thought, oh, well, I would like a different picture, something with a little color. And look at this. And yes, you can purchase this. This is from Alibaba.com, but it's illegal, right? You can pretty much get anything out there. Let's talk about ionizing radiation, okay? We talked about, of course, a little bit earlier, the low frequency electromagnetic radiation. We said that, like from power lines, that doesn't ionize. Uh, and we said, well, what could be the risk of that. Ionization is usually required to damage DNA in some way, especially, well, for the most part, usually that is true. Now, again, ionizing radiation, you form ions, damage to DNA can lead to cancers. So, whoopsie. So, I was looking for x-rays to show you, and this cracked me up. So, here's Kermit the Frog, and if he had an x-ray, I guess that's what it would look like. So, everyone, when it comes to ionizing radiation, as I mentioned way back when, there's a baseline that everyone is exposed to. Everyone gets exposed to about 2 millisieverts, remember that, every year. And if you work in, say, radiology, there's an occupational limit of about 50 millisieverts per year. Um, when it comes to annual exposure to medical x-rays, okay, in countries with at least one physician per 100,000 population, generally with these x-rays you get about 1.92 millisieverts per capita per year, just so you know. Globally, what's the average? If this is what we kind of see in like the US population on average. Globally, it's like about 1.15 millisieverts, can't say it, millisieverts per capita. One of the things you probably didn't know is people who work in the airline industry, because they fly so high, they are exposed to a lot of the radiation that we don't get down here. So they are actually exposed to pretty high levels of ionizing radiation. Sources of non-ionizing radiation. Well, let's talk about cell phones. I know this image on the right cracked me up. So, cell phones, a lot of controversy out there. People are always worried because they have their smartphones, their cell phones with them everywhere. And it does seem sometimes people have them glued to their head or maybe part of body jewelry in this case. But remember, cell phones, they do emit radio wave radiation, and those are the extremely low frequency types of radiation in the electromagnetic field. Remember? Okay. And who has a cell phone? Well, throughout the whole world, even in places where they don't have clean water, people have cell phones. It's estimated about 2/3 of the global population have cell phones. That's 4.6 billion people with a cell phone. And of course, the concern is brain cancer. But again, it's all inconclusive. We haven't really figured anything out. So, that fear right now, we don't see any correlation. But people are looking, but we don't see it. Tanning salons. Okay. Well, we talked about thymine dimers, right? From ultraviolet radiation. Yes, tanning beds, well, they're not very highly regulated, and mostly they do emit UVA radiation, which is a group 1 carcinogen. So I won't go into that one again, but I remember my 3 Mile Island tanning salon. I wish I had a picture of that. Okay. Environmental noise. So recreational activities. So you leave, you're done for the weekend, you're done with work, and what do? You go out target shooting, listen to rock music, go to concerts, go to motorcycle races, or maybe you have a motorcycle. My family, they're all into motorcycles. Personal music players. Remember what we were saying before and how that's especially impacting young people, especially if they have cheap headphones. The prevalence of hearing loss in U.S. adolescents, 15% in a study between 1988 and 1994. That increased to 20% in a study from 2005 to 2006. So that number keeps climbing. They probably just don't have the most recent epidemiological information on that one. Airport noise, of course, is pretty alarming, especially at schools. And that's going to not just cause, it's not a hearing damage problem as much as it's going to stop the children from concentrating. So it's going to stop reading comprehension and stop long-term memory. And we know that it does impact that in children. What about regulation? Regulation related to hazards of modern life. So when it comes to the indoor environment, well, that's hopefully the EPA is there to inform and provide technical assistance through outreach programs, especially on lead hazards. So this is from online. I got this from the EPA website, and you can go in there, and it does have various ways to communicate with the public about the hazards of lead and why you need to get that out of there. The EPA is also responsible for financial support and technical assistance for states who are stuck with radon problems or in programs. But again, it all depends how much the EPA is funded, and that changes depending on administrative choices, spending choices, right? And this basically just shows this is from the EPA Radon website. And as I mentioned before, we're in trouble. All the areas that are dark red, I know in the United States we have a lot of radon areas. So if you're over here in California, really there's only a few areas that have high rates of radon. But in Omaha, Council Bluffs, basically this whole area, not good. So this allows you to go in and find out who you have in your state and in your area to help you with radon and remediation. There's also the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and their main focus is on packaging and labeling. Okay, although, again, is it thorough? Could probably use a little updating. So, regulation related to hazards of modern life when it comes to cigarettes and cosmetics. Cigarettes, yeah, okay. So, regulation says you can't smoke on domestic flights. The cigarette companies can't put ads on TV or radio, and they put warnings on the packages. But somehow, some way, they didn't quite get into they really didn't regulate much else when they had the opportunity to do so. So cigarettes, even though we know it is not just it's loaded with carcinogens, it is a tremendous health risk, a hazard, but it's not regulated as a hazardous substance, not even as a chemical substance or a consumer product. What about cosmetics, the products and ingredients? Well, here's the thing. You can put something out there and you don't need to get approval from FDA. They're really not regulated. It's kind of up to the company to supply the information, but all you have to do is say, well, this is a trade secret. I'm not going to tell you what's in there. Okay, then you don't have to reveal that. Also, remember you do not have to reveal any inert ingredients. Remember, those are the ones that are not part of the intended use. So anything else in there goes. As of 2006, there are 10 ingredients prohibited in cosmetics, including mercury. Wow. So mercury's out. What are the other 9? And what are the rest of them? So when it comes to noise, there are 2 federal laws, unfortunately. The divisions that are supposed to take care of this have been unfunded for nearly 30 years, and regulations should occur, I guess, at state and local levels. All right, as I said, we needed to talk a little bit about hormone personal care products. They used to be very popular, and in fact, you can still get these things marketed to you over the counter and otherwise. So let's just talk about hormones. Okay, think back. Remember why we don't like phthalates and biphenyls and those endocrine disruptors. Okay, think way back to that lecture. Those chemicals, hormones, run everything that there is to run in your body. They tell the cells to do what they need to do. They also tell cells to start replicating and stop replicating. Okay. Now, your body hopefully is nicely balanced. Remember, hormones are in very minute concentrations and very, very balanced. If they go in an imbalance, okay, crazy things happen. Severe health problems can occur. But for a healthy person, their hormone levels are nicely balanced, and that's the way we like them. Now, here's a product, and I kind of blanked it out just as far as where you get this, but this is an anti-aging advanced growth factor serum. So let's read a little bit about this. Okay. Youthful skin reflects the inner workings of growth factors that drive tissue function and regeneration in response to both internal and external factors. The decreased concentrations of four key growth factors as we grow older inhibit the skin matrix and lead to the telltale signs of normal aging. Replenishing these growth factors restores the skin's natural rejuvenation process. Research shows that when topically applied as a serum, these growth factors support the appearance of firmer, younger skin. All right, doesn't that sound wonderful? Now, you are all trained in healthcare and healthcare science, right? Do you remember what epidermal growth factor is? Insulin-like growth factor 1, what that one is? Vascular endothelial growth factor, fibroblast growth factor. Do you know all those? Probably not. Most people would just be impressed and think, "Wow, I need to buy those because I don't want to look old." Now, whether or not this even works when put as a topical is up there for debate. How pure these solutions are up for debate. How concentrated each of these, what's the dose that you get with every application? Who knows? But let me tell you, you should never mess with hormones. Anything that says hormones, never mess with those, particularly when you are over 35, because hormones also regulate how cells divide, if they divide, how much they divide. And hormones tell cells to stop dividing. Those growth factor things. Now, what happens when cells don't remember to stop replicating, or maybe they replicate too much? Yeah, right, right. So, in some instances, some of those things could give you a risk of cancer. I'm not saying this product does. Not going to go there because I really have no idea what's in there, and probably neither did the consumers. But this should never be a selling point. This should make you run away. Whoops, sorry. And the other thing that just cracks me up there is that probably people buying this stuff, they're probably the ones that buy organic meat because they don't believe in hormones. Anyway, probiotics. I love probiotics. I really do. I take probiotics every day. Once when I was shopping at a makeup counter and I was buying some of the makeup that I normally buy, and I love these products and I buy them, just bought some the other week. And so probiotics are so big. And they had this advertising marquee for a probiotic rejuvenating skin lotion. I'm like, what? So I tried desperately to try to figure out what kinds of bacteria are in here and what this is supposed to do. And truly, I tried to even culture these. I tried to grow them up in the lab. Couldn't grow anything. So really, your own skin's normal microbiota should be okay. You should you should take good care of your skin. Your skin is your first line of defense. And try rehydration, eating properly. Um, maybe, and yeah, keeping your skin from drying out. And I do like certain products that don't have fragrances, that don't have a lot of additives. That's what I choose. I think that's much more effective. It just cracks me up what they can put on a label to sell to people. And like I said, I buy products from these people. I like their products. But anyway, sharing global impacts and resources. Okay, do we share very well? What about quantifying? how many resources we use here in the United States are so ecological impact. What is that? How do we quantify that? Well, okay, there's some math involved, but it's not bad. So take a deep breath. It's okay. The impact equation will make sense to you. So, when it comes to quantifying the impacts of development and developed countries, you look at population times consumption. That will equal impact. Okay, yeah. All right. So if you have a big population and they're consuming a lot of resources, that's going to be a big impact number, right? It's very logical, very intuitive. Okay. So we can just kind of designate this with an I equals P times C. I'm going to add another number in there. Okay, so again, now C, sometimes we can expand that just a little bit and talk about this equation that talks about um, affluence. Okay, so once you get you could also do I, okay, impact equals population times affluence, you've got more money, okay, times technology. All right, now that makes sense too. All of these allow you to quantify the impact of developed communities, populations, countries. Let's talk about something called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is a term described very commonly by biologists when they talk about certain ecosystems. Okay, but this can also apply to the planet, to the Earth. So a carrying capacity says, okay, in a nice balanced ecosystem, the environment, the community can only hold just so many different or so many organisms. So the population is rather limited in that particular ecosystem, depending on resources and pollutants, okay, and competition, things like that. So if a population, for example, is allowed to increase without anything stopping it. Okay, nothing inhibiting it. So there's plenty of food, plenty of water, plenty of real estate, places to stay. Little like could be a burrow or a nest or some nesting materials, and there's no pollutant stopping you either. Okay, you can get to a certain area that okay says now your population you have just so much food available, so many resources, so many nesting sites, or if you go further, let's say you're in an aquatic ecosystem, there's pollutants there, there's competition. So the community, basically the community and the environment keeps your population from going too high. So that's the carrying capacity. It's the maximum impact an ecosystem can support for extended period of time. Okay, and this is the way nature has worked forever until mankind got here. Mankind has an interesting way through technology to increase the carrying capacity of the environment, of the planet. So, living like this, I mean, okay, where are they getting their food? They're not growing this. So yes, technology has changed things for humans. So we really don't live in any kind of balanced ecosystem. What is our carrying capacity? Well, let's take a look at the human population growth curve. And about pretty much every biology book has this, so just following along. Okay, we have before the Common Era, okay, the BC, kind of coming up here, and then you have the so pretty much the population stayed constant. Well, we weren't really good at keeping food around, especially when the weather became really bad. But once we started to introduce modern agricultural practices, we would grow our food, keep domestic animals. The population started to increase a little bit and things started to climb here. Now, if you're wondering what this dip is, this is the Black Death, the plague. It especially had a big impact on big crowded cities where resources and healthcare and ignorance was pretty widespread. So that really took down the population. Can you see? This is the total human population on the planet. But as we got to the 19th century and we became industrialized, we had the Industrial Revolution. Now we had ways to grow huge amounts of food, okay, and harvest them and transport them and refrigerate them. Plus, we have medical science that keeps us alive. We have antibiotics. And all of this, all of these wonderful technological innovations has caused an unbelievable exponential growth curve. Okay? The carrying capacity, where is that for humans? Well, that's a good question. And what happens if you overshoot the carrying capacity? Well, for natural ecosystems, you always get sort of a boom and then a bust, where you get a huge exponential growth way above the carrying capacity, and then something happens. There's toxic waste, there's disease, there's war over resources. But this is what happens in a natural ecosystem. What about humans? Well, okay, do we have sustainable development or development whose impact can be maintained over many generations? Well, okay, to answer all of this, we have to look at the ecological footprint, and this is going to measure impact. Okay, the area on the Earth's surface that's required to provide enough resources for and absorb the waste of a person or population with it with a given lifestyle. So we'll look at the United States and other Western countries, as well as those that are developing or under-resourced, right? I like this illustration. I got this. So this shows our economic impact, okay? So components of an ecological footprint. Okay, first of all, for your population, however much that might be, your community or global population, you need to have an area to produce energy, okay? So, coal or nuclear energy or however you're going to get it, fossil fuels, we'll just say in general instead of coal. You need enough area to produce food on land. So you need bioproductive land, farmland. How about at sea? Yes, you need to have produce food produced at sea. So that's part also of the ecological footprint for your population. You need forested areas, areas that are there to produce wood products because those are very common and very needed for a lot of things. You need real estate, which is called built up land. So you need to house people somewhere, right? And forested areas are needed to absorb carbon dioxide if you're going to use those fossil fuels. Now, the one thing that bothers me, your textbook talks about forests, so that makes you think, oh, well, forests are really the best way to take the CO2 that we've released into the air and put it back into the tissue of plants, and so therefore take away our carbon footprint. But what your author also should have mentioned was that algae in aquatic ecosystems, so your ponds, your lakes, your rivers, your oceans, okay, good healthy oceans and waterways have good algae. The good kind will also absorb a tremendous amount of CO2, but they need to be in a balanced ecosystem, right? We don't like eutrophication. This is just showing the top 10 countries by ecological footprint. So the good news is the United States, and this is looking at per capita. So, so almost to 10, and I'll explain this in just a little bit as far as the ecological footprint. So we're not the worst. The United Arab Emirates, well, they've got a lot of affluence, right? They've got a lot of money there. So they are ranked number one as 9.5, but we're 9.4. Kuwait, Denmark, Australia, New Zealand, they're almost neck and neck there too. Canada, Norway, Estonia, and Ireland. So these are all the top 10 that are hogging resources, ecological resources, and leaving a huge footprint. So, facing a challenging future. This just shows when it comes to the global carrying capacity in 2007, it was 1.8 hectares per capita. So this is kind of what it was, a 1.8 about right here. That was the biocapacity. Um, the global average ecological footprint, though, is about 2.7 hectares per capita. So this is what we think the carrying capacity is, but the average is somewhere 2.7. So somewhere like, sorry, right about here is the average. And who's hogging the resources? Well, again, back to what we were talking about before. Um, so, and if you think that China and India aren't trying to catch up here, wrong. They have a very quickly growing economy and their footprints are coming up very, very quickly. So that's going to raise the average again fast. What's that going to do to our carrying capacity? Well, it's going to bypass our carrying capacity. So, key ecological and demographic realities. Western style development is not sustainable globally. There are enormous disparities between ecological footprints of richer and poorer countries and developing countries. Future strain on global carrying capacity will be driven by regions with the largest populations. Again, China and India, and they both have increasing per capita footprints. They are going up, 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 up. They probably will surpass the United States, maybe. Well, I guess it's a maybe, but could happen. This also gives you just a quick visual, a map visual of those areas with the largest global ecological footprints. Okay. And yes, we are here. Okay. So, facing a challenging future. It is a daunting challenge designing a global future that is both more sustainable and more equitable. Technology, um, maybe reorient everything towards green. And I think actually this is more important than your author. I think it is going to be part of the solution. I think it has to be. But of course, there are a lot of concerns, the growing burden of ecological debt, the reality of global connectedness. There's a lot of people that just think what happens somewhere over there doesn't impact me, and oh boy, or what they do doesn't impact me. Yeah, it does. It really does. Of course, the global climate change problem is it's a big problem hanging in the balance. I wasn't going to, and this is the way the author kind of left things, and I wasn't going to end it like this, okay? I hope not. So I have hope, and I hope that you can also keep the faith here just a little bit. There are some very smart people, and science produces data that produces facts. And I realize sometimes people get frustrated with scientific information, but that isn't the scientist and that isn't the scientific process's fault. Remember what we were saying about fluoridation. And then people say, well, okay, now they say that fluoridation really isn't causing cancer. Well, you can't believe anything that comes out from those scientists. Well, that isn't the science. That isn't the science. This is this is the process that leads us to understand how the world works. The press gets a hold of some of this information, puts this out there before it's really ready to go public. So there's a lot of good, hardworking scientists out there with really good information and a lot of good people who are interested in community health. And so I have faith. I have hope. Okay. And I love this picture. So, Earth Day, April 22nd, 2017. Look at that. See? So we're not alone. And being older, again, old person story, there's always something really crazy going on, and people, in the community will say, why doesn't somebody do something about that? And we're always going through this. All right. But things do change. We learn. Of course, that one was a very long lesson, and so is this, but okay, we got rid of that. We know that this isn't all pretty fluffy white fun stuff. Okay. And of course, having babies advertise for cigarettes to mommies and daddies, okay, that's no longer acceptable. But we do learn. We do learn. So, another example, when I was young, people used to just throw their garbage on the street. I mean, seriously, you'd be on the road and people would have their McDonald's bags and just toss it. And this would be so common. There would be so much garbage on the side of the road. You would be astonished. Or maybe you wouldn't, but you should be astonished. But there was a wonderful campaign, and I love this, and it got to people. It did. And there was this Native American gentleman who, with his horse, was walking through just a field of garbage, and somebody threw out again a bag of garbage at his feet, and it was very emotional. And we did learn to not litter. We knew that pollution, at least that, the solid waste pollution, was bad. We can learn. We're not hopeless. At least I think so. So, first of all, so what can we do? Well, we can educate. Instead of being unaware, be aware. You've taken this class. Good for you. You are now aware. So, okay, now you know recycle, reuse, reduce. Okay. Get out there. Also, educate other people and let them know, okay, this is what we need to do. Maybe get involved, volunteer. So, I just wanted to show you something really fun. And different communities have different resources at their disposal, and there isn't one community that is probably like another in every respect. So, again, some solutions work for some communities and some for others. But I just wanted to show you something really cute. So, um, this is so where do you think Europe's largest banana plantation is held? Where do you think? Okay, take out the map. You're probably thinking, I can't imagine. Wouldn't that be in like the Americans, kind of South American-ish? Actually, Iceland. I know you're thinking, no, yeah. That was one of the amazing things that I found out when I traveled. I suggest traveling. Traveling provides you with the best education ever. But they have a lot of geothermal heat. It's very volcanic. So it's actually very efficient for them to have greenhouses, and they can heat it by just geothermal natural energy. Not something we can do here, that is true. Maybe Wyoming and Montana, perhaps. But yeah, they produce a ton of produce, including Europe's largest. It's the Europe's largest banana plantation. And do they eat a lot of bananas? Yeah, when I was traveling there, I was eating bananas all the time. Good source of potassium. Okay, so go out there, promote global and community health, and that's what you can do. Also, oops. Okay. And I want to thank you. It was really fun. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed the class. I hope you were able to take an awful lot away from the class. If you have any questions now or in the future, send me an email. I'd be delighted to talk with you, and keep in touch. Little note here. Are you interested in an extra credit opportunity? Send me an email. Say, Miss Eden, I am interested. Do you have an extra credit opportunity? Send that, and I'll let you know. Okay, good luck. Take care. Oh, and don't forget about when to take the exam, right? It's earlier than usual. Take care.